logistics of this film was very ambitious for the budget. I've been involved in 4 other movies, and there isn't, I don't think, a single gun in them. This film is wall-to-wall guns.
Action!
The film as a whole, I would sum up and say it was an adventure. We were very conscious from an early stage that the film demanded an enormous amount and an array of weapons. From the Kalashnikovs to the tanks to the arms fair. And many minibus scouting journeys, conversations were spent discussing how we were going to appropriate the vast array of weapons that we needed.
In fact, it was almost akin to being an arms dealer, because I had to arrange so many weapons each day. The strange thing, I almost had to get into the head of an arms dealer. I came across a number of guys in the making of the film, a number of arms dealers, and I actually liked them, which was the disturbing part of it, I think.
When I first read the script, I wasn't sure I really wanted to be this character, because I was afraid of getting in my head too much and the things that he's really doing. I certainly haven't ever read a screenplay like Lord of War before. A lot of times you see pictures that deal with the sort of the drug business, but very rarely do you get to have what appears to be an inside look at the gun business. It seems like there's something very honest about this and very truthful about it.
There's a scene in the movie where there are 50 Soviet T-72 tanks, and they were owned by one private arms dealer in the Czech Republic. And he said, there's just one catch. You know, you can have them for your movie, but I need them back by December because I'm selling them to Libya. Life kept imitating art because, you know, you're in Africa and you want a plane to replicate an arms dealer's plane. And where do you get one? Well, you actually rent it from an arms dealer. And so the plane in the film was running real guns into the Congo a week before we were filming it with fake guns. And the Russian crew would say, it looks authentic. When I needed 3,000 Kalashnikovs for this armory that Nicolas Cage's character walked through with his uncle, it was cheaper to get real guns than fake guns. So we bought 3,000 real Kalashnikovs and then sold them back. So it was sort of an elaborate rental, but you know, we sold them back for a discount. So I wouldn't make much of an arms dealer, but the fact that I could get 3,000 Kalashnikovs so easily was sobering. There's still, I think, 1 million Kalashnikovs in Ukraine that will still end up in one war zone or another. It is a sort of a great unexplored consequence of the end of the Cold War, that there was suddenly warehouses full of weapons and no one watching them, and most of them ended up in Africa. South Africa was the main location for the film, but it had to stand in for 13 different countries. South Africa had to be West Africa and North Africa and Beirut and the Caribbean, South America, many other countries. The Czech Republic stood in for Ukraine, and New York played New York.
What's your name, sir?
I'm Prosper.
Prosper? Good name. So let me see you raise your...
I was very keen from an early stage to make each country look different, the people to look different. So we sent sort of people scouts out, if you like, to go and look for extras at a very early stage. And one of my assistants built up an enormous database in South Africa, people from Namibia and predominantly South Africa, to feature in the film and its African locations.
This is what's great about here, is that you definitely find all the diversity that was required for the film. Otherwise, we would not have been able to do the film.
South Africa is everything that we know about South Africa. You know, they're 10 years on or 12 years on from a major change in their society. They know who they are and they know how the world views them. And they've just opened up to the rest of the world and said, bring your films in, make your films, and we will accommodate you. What I got from South Africa was a lot of hope, you know, especially from the younger generation, the generation that didn't grow up with that
I remember going with Andrew on one of our first recce's. Andrew said to me afterwards, what an amazing feeling of joy came out of this township. I knew exactly what he meant. There was no sorrow, and though there's enormous problem with AIDS and deprivation, but the feeling of happiness that came, and we were greeted everywhere with smiles and children.
What an incredible experience to spend part of your life down in South Africa. I went on safari a couple of times and had a really incredible time during the making of this film. It was easier for me because I didn't have the workload that Nick had in this film, so I was able to take advantage of being in South Africa and really getting to know it a little bit.
When I read the script and it described an Antonov, which for the non-plane enthusiasts amongst us is a plane about the size of a jumbo jet, only with 4 propellers, which makes it more lethal. The script read that we had to land it on 1,000 people on a road, on a dirt track, and they scatter and it comes to a halt millimetres from a little baby sitting on the track. My first port of call was the Civil Aviation Authority in South Africa, just to find out whether we could even do this. I suspected we probably wouldn't be able to do it with real people, and indeed we were right, and the producers suspected the same, and we had to shoot most of the sequence using plates. However, we still had to fly a plane over people, or to look like it was flying over people, and we still had to fly a plane onto a dirt road, which in itself is a sort of health and safety nightmare. The course of action we took in the end was we got hold of an air base right bang in the middle of South Africa, called Robertson, wine country, and we covered it with dirt. So it was a metal road underneath, but then dirt on top.
Okay, everybody. We are now going to bring the plane into land. We will roll all cameras when it comes into land.
Then we came to film the actual stunt, of which only one element meant that we physically had human beings on the road and the plane on the road as well. Although the plane was half a mile up the road and the human beings were half a mile down the road, we, through the joy of long lenses on the cameras, Amir brilliantly made it look like they were right next to each other.
Drop the toy and go on to
All our extras, sort of 500 of them, they all spoke a range of probably 12 different languages. So it's not just a case of getting one translator in, although we had an amazing guy called Sandile he knew about 6 of the languages, so he covered most of it.
Quite fantastic.
It's very good. You get the camera a little closer.
No, I didn't get the camera closer. Look where he went. He's in the grass.
No, I'm kidding.
Can we see that one?
Well, it's always hard when you're shooting out in the middle of nowhere and, you've got X amount of time before the sun goes down and 200 extras in a giant 1960s Russian plane supposed to land in the middle of a shot and 4-page dialogue scene while that's going on. For some reason that can rattle the nervous system. I'll probably take that to my grave, remembering that. It's fun.
There was a South African capon vulture, I think it was called, on the set that day. And I had no doubt that this thing was a very ferocious Velociraptor from like Jurassic Park. I mean, the thing was a dinosaur. And it was yelling, it was like squawking and jump hopping, and it had these talons that if it landed on any part of you, you'd be in pieces. So I was sort of taken by that. And they were feeding it baby vultures, which made the whole scene more horrifying.
We found this guy who we'd auditioned and found he could lie very, very still for a long time, because the vulture trainer had told us that the only way the vulture would go onto him is if he actually thought that this guy was dead. But on the last take, this vulture just went ka-dunk straight. I think it was his hand or something. Anyway, this poor guy who'd been brilliant, I mean just brilliant, and lain there so still, got the shock of his life as this bird just pecked away at his hand. And it didn't hurt him, he was absolutely fine, and he laughed along with us. And it just, the sort of release at that moment of, I mean, there are moments in filmmaking when you just think, what are we trying to do?
And then I'm working with Sammy, who plays Andre Baptiste Jr. He's firing his gold-plated Kalashnikov out of the car, going, yeah! And there's two Liberian girls dressed as cheerleaders from the football team back in the States. The whole thing was very bizarre.
We're going to give you some rifles. These rifles are real rifles, they're not fakes. Please, when you've got these rifles, look after them. Don't put them down in the sand and get grit in them. Some of you may have to fire these rifles, okay? So we don't want to get sand in so they don't work, and we don't want sand flying across the set. So look after them as if they were your personal property.
We shot very close to Namibia in 120-degree heat.
And we were filming 4 different countries in the desert, but it was hot, and of course we were at the end of the shoot. So we were tired, and we were doing big explosions.
On the truck here, we're weakening it in such a fashion that it looks like a whole bunch of ammunition was set off by a hand grenade. And again, we're not going to the Hollywood Fireball, so the Tyrone and his crew have worked on this truck, weakening it in specific areas, putting in cannons into the frame to crack and break the frame and fragment the frame, cannons to throw things high up in the air, plus we're also feeding the explosion with large volumes of oxygen, to give it a quicker flash. Basically, this way it's safe. We're going to have a man in very close proximity. The area of projection of debris is designed in such a way that it will not project left or right of a specific cone in which our stunt double is going to be running. And hopefully, other than needing a change of underwear and taking out some earplugs, he should be all right.
Stand by, we are rolling, and action!
It was tough, and we were working fairly substantial hours at that point.
Normally you shoot a 5-day week or a 6-day week. We shot a 7-day week.
In the desert is fairly arduous for 120 cast and crew. It pushed us to the limit. That night, I've never seen 120 people get out of a location so fast.
I had a United Nations crew. Guess my right and left hand are Amir and Jean-Vincent.
The director interested in graphic, in architecture, in space, in frame, so it's much better for me because I have a good partner and I can propose a lot of ideas and he can choose and he can push me and he has a very precise look.
He had to come up with a stylized approach. We had to be quite resourceful, to make South Africa look like West Africa. We had to use sort of cheap tricks, really. We didn't have a huge budget, so we would just lay out 10,000 bricks, because bricks are cheap, and dress a woman in garb from North Africa. It was also a good juxtaposition because Yuri would walk past in his business suit and he'd be selling the most high-tech weaponry. And yet in the foreground you have all of these sort of ancient bricks drying there, and it just gave a good contrast to the worlds.
This kind of job is good for me and exciting, and at the same time very very tough because every set has to be perfect, and normally I can find 10 or 15 sets less important so my crew can relax a little bit, but for this one it's impossible.
Jean-Vincent is an element all to himself. He is extremely talented. He trained as an architect. He always gives a refreshing angle on something. He could actually build the house physically properly if he had to. So his sets are extraordinary.
The pattern of this movie all the time is like a casing, a bullet, a circle. A lot of design are based on the cylinder or the circle, and we turn, we circle around. So it's very graphic but very beautiful.
That's good, actually.
Amir's brilliant at moving the camera. Because Yuri Orlov, the character Nicolas Cage plays, is such a nomad, international arms dealer, I felt that as he was traveling, the camera should also be traveling. And Amir did that brilliantly.
Amir is so determined in what he wants to do and brilliant at what he does that it does almost make it effortless. He just knows exactly where he wants his camera. Him and Jean Vincent had tapped into how Andrew wanted the film to look more than anyone else.
Is that good? Like that?
I don't like that angle on him. I think.
Well, you can change the angle.
I think maybe we're here. Where do you want this?
Well, it's going to be like this. Okay. With the legs going out.
The set that Andrew kind of builds up has got so much trust on it and so much freedom on it. You can try anything. You can do anything, and then, you know, if it doesn't work, we'll cut it. But if you have the courage to go for something that's unusual or a little strange, go for it. And why not? That's what I loved about working with that man.
I like actually the strange contrast with religion.
His eye for detail is quite exceptional. For example, every prop that was used in the film was handpicked by him, down to every little hand prop, up to every tank, was literally picked by him.
I want these guys over here.
He has a very precise look. He loves symmetry. He likes to be very, very clean, very polished. Everything is perfect. The frame, his design has to be very elegant and very precise.
His movies have a real opinion and a real approach that's unique to him. I think that's one of the reasons why I really like working with him. It's very rare that you find somebody that really has their own voice, and Andrew really has that.
I don't think it's a political film because it's the truth. I mean, if the truth is political, then it's political.
At the end of the movie, you just don't want to have anything to do with this world. You're even wondering why it has to exist today. Unfortunately, this is the reality.
I'm glad that this film has been done by Andrew, because then now we can talk about it, and now we can even start to make decisions about that type of stuff that our governments do without us thinking. You know, theatre, in my opinion, as an actor, is one of those things that a storyteller does, is you help society move itself forward, or at least, which this film does, question itself.
It's not like any other movie you've seen. That I know. That's what I feel very confident about, having finished the movie, is that I know it will be unique.
And the way that Traffic kind of showed us the underbelly of the drug trade, this film gets into that same arena, but with guns.
He always obviously has a larger point he's trying to make with his movies, whether he's writing and directing. But this one, more so than Gattaca or The Truman Show, his point is very much grounded in today's world and exactly how the world operates.
It's not like a typical Andrew Niccol script that ventures or borders on science fiction. It's more grounded, more linear story structure with Andrew's unique lens on it, if you will. I think it should be a good counterpoint.
Some people say, well, you know, this is a left-wing film. The truth is, the US, for instance, is by far and away the biggest arms supplier in the world. But that's the same if Bush is president or Clinton is president. So it doesn't really have any party affiliation, this business. It's just business.
Affects literally millions and millions of people. It's one of the most fundamental human rights issues in the world today.
Never go to war, especially with yourself. Most people don't realize that that's exactly what the United States and many other countries are doing.
There are over 600 million small arms and light weapons in circulation around the world, and nearly 250 million of those are in the United States, enough for every man, woman, and child. A place like sub-Saharan Africa, which many people think has many more small arms and light weapons, probably only has about 30 million. Europe, by contrast, has about 84 million. But 30 million in Africa may have a much more devastating impact than the 250 million in the United States.
Small arms and light weapons have caused devastating effect on the country. And this is why we're taking very seriously that the small arms and light weapons were used indiscriminately throughout Sierra Leone as well as in the sub-region to pursue this rebel war. And we are looking at it not purely from the disarmament point of view, in terms of numbers, but the humanitarian, the human impact, the human dimension of small arms. Thousands of people were killed, including children, and the linkage also with the diamonds make the problem much more terrible.
Small arms and light weapons are produced in over 90 countries. There are about 1,200 factories that manufacture or produce some aspect of small arms and light weapons. They're traded around the world in virtually every country. The total small arms trade is worth about $4 billion on the legal side and about $1 billion on the illegal side, or the black market side of these weapons.
We spent so much money on our defense that the Soviet Union couldn't keep up. And so we won the Cold War, and most people would say that was a good thing.
You had former republics like the Ukraine becoming independent, and Ukraine not only had stockpiles of AK-47s, they had their own arms industry. And since they were starting out as this fledgling country with very few economic ties, without strong regulations yet, it became a source for dealers and brokers to go spend a little money, get some weapons that they could then transfer to conflict regions. And the Ukrainians were certainly willing to do that because they needed hard cash.
Mikhail Kalashnikov invented the AK-47, and this man, who had very humble beginnings from a peasant farmer family outside of Siberia, has become the father of this weapon that is used around the world. The AK-47 was produced out of his experiences in World War II, where he saw firsthand how the Germans had an automatic rifle that could fire multiple shots, while his Russian army could only fire 1 to 2 shots at a time. And after being wounded and convalescing in a hospital, he said, "I'm going to develop something to protect the motherland." And his invention was actually intended to protect Russia from its enemies. And he had no idea that it would become the most ubiquitous weapon of modern war.
One of the major problems, especially in a post-Cold War world, has been the fact that there are still enormous numbers of stockpiles of weapons in the Soviet Union, in Eastern Europe, and elsewhere around the world.
There were more guns than you could possibly need to fight a generation of warfare. And so some opportunistic middlemen and dealers, many of them with former attachments to intelligence agencies and so forth, got hold of these weapons, and they used, false certificates and flying under the flags of different countries, and managed to get these very quickly into the war zones.
If we look at Liberia, for example, Charles Taylor brought in weapons from the former Eastern Europe, from as many sources as he could, and he used those to wage war within Liberia.
Charles Taylor is probably the model in the modern era of how you can take hold of a whole country if you have access to these light arms and small weapons, because he started out with about 100 supporters, many of them teenagers, armed with AK-47s. They went into Liberia, they started taking control of territory, terrorizing people. At a certain point, they got enough control that they could sell off timber, in this case to a nephew of Francois Mitterrand of France, who was one of their intermediaries. And they just sort of built from there. And the next thing you know, they had turned the entire country into his fiefdom.
He was actually indicted by the International Criminal Court on counts of war crimes.
So to think about an example of where a small arms shipment has had a huge impact on human rights. Think about Liberia in the summer of 2003. The capital, Monrovia, was being hotly contested between rebels who were trying to overthrow the government of Charles Taylor and those forces that were loyal to Charles Taylor. Both sides have been known to commit widespread atrocities, war crimes, In this case, they had been fighting back and forth and effectively ran out of ammunition. But the rebel side was able to get a fresh shipment of arms that was routed illegally into Liberia, which was under a UN arms embargo, and provided to them with help from a number of governments that arranged this. And as a result, they were able to go on a rampage. This was a shipment of mortars that were lobbed into makeshift camps of displaced people, hiding out near the US Embassy compound and other centers where they were hoping for some protection. So many people were killed that people became infuriated that the US government and others weren't doing enough to help them. They dragged bodies to the entrance of the US Embassy in protest, the charred bodies of people who had been killed by these mortars.
One of the most tragic consequences of decades of conflict in West Africa has been the widespread use of child soldiers. And what we've seen is that because these children are able to carry a gun, to be unconventional forces, that they've been utilized in virtually every conflict in West Africa. And often these kids are plied with drugs and alcohol to make them more pliable so that they'll do what the adult soldiers command them to do. Often they're given combinations of cocaine and gunpowder to make them high so that they don't understand the consequences of their actions. Other times they're given amulets to wear around their neck, which they're told will make them invincible and impervious to bullets. So these children are tortured, they're abused, they often become drug addicts. They have a very, very difficult recovery once the conflict has ended.
Our soldiers sometimes confront kids in battle. And all of their training is, when you're threatened, you shoot back. But when they see kids, little kids sometimes, quite young, their first reaction is to not shoot back. The special problem for proliferation is landmines. But landmines are not the military-looking things that you might know about. Landmines are also made as dolls, or as toy trucks or toy cars, something that children, including child soldiers, might be attracted to pick up, and then it blows up in their face.
We're all aware of the nuclear issue. We're all aware of major conflicts between countries. We don't spend much time looking at the small arms, which do most of the killing, in places like Western Africa, where hundreds of thousands of people have been killed in Liberia, Rwanda, elsewhere, but doesn't get the same attention as other wars have gotten during the last decades, because they don't involve high politics between us and the Europeans and the Soviets and the Chinese and so on. But in terms of the tragedy created for people and for countries around the world, it's light arms that are the mechanisms for the tragedies.
When you're dealing with certain technology and certain weaponry, as a general rule, these are not being bought in the United States in large commodities off the street or the black market. In my experience, they're coming from legitimate weapon manufacturers or high-tech manufacturers such as General Electric that'll produce radar tubes that are used, among other things, in guidance systems for missiles. So you can't generally buy those on a street corner. So you ultimately go to the source, the manufacturer.
It is true that even when controls are in place, it's very difficult to implement and enforce them for a variety of reasons. First of all, different countries have different laws covering the activities of arms trafficking, and those laws varied widely in scope and range and range of punishment as well. Then there is a major problem, which is political will to implement and enforce these controls. Some of these traffickers have been used by governments to carry out covert deals, for example. So if the political will to go after them is lacking, there is very little that the law per se could do.
There was this Ukrainian national who was living in Italy a few years ago, using an Israeli passport, various other passports. He was living near Milan, and he was arranging big arms deliveries to Liberia for the RUF, armed opposition in Sierra Leone, who were committing terrible atrocities. And the arms deliveries were coming in from Ukraine just before these crimes against humanity were being committed in Freetown, in West Africa, and so on. Now, this man was arrested by the Italian police, and they found at least 1,000 pages of documents in his apartment. He was an international arms fixer. He was charged with delivering arms to this armed group in Sierra Leone and violating the United Nations arms embargo. But the prosecution couldn't find any law in Italy that he had violated, because Italian law had not made the violation of a United Nations arms embargo a criminal offense in its own country where the arms had not been brought into Italy. So this guy was let off scot-free.
Arms are sort of a symbol of strength. They're kind of sexy. If you're a president of a new country, you want to have your army and your air force, if possible, your navy as well. So if there's any number of reasons for buying arms, well, how do you find out about what's available? Well, you go to an arms show.
An arms show, of which there are many, is a bizarre sort of experience. It's like going to the auto show or the bed and bath show. It's just that they're selling stuff that'll kill you. And so they've got entertainment chalets, they've got models of the weapons, they've got the actual weapons, they're doing flight demonstrations if it's an air show, if it's based on ground equipment, they might be shooting. And all the time people are throwing back drinks and they're making connections and networking. And the governments are the biggest pushers, in a sense. They're the ones who organize the exhibits. There's the ones who set up a lot of the pavilions. And so they're sort of hand in glove with the companies trying to sell weaponry. And they often bring people, uniformed military personnel, who have used these things in warfare. And they become sort of, product validators, saying, oh, this was great when I used it in the Gulf War, and I think your country couldn't do better. And so it's really a corrupt game all the way around, but it's almost taken for granted because they've been doing it so long.
The problem is that war and arms sales are just a symptom of a much larger problem. So really, if you want to stop a war, you stop buying your big SUVs, you stop filling them full of gas and driving around, you stop buying the commodities like diamonds that make these wars happen. If nobody valued diamonds and if gas wasn't really that important to us, do you think that we would see a lot of the conflicts we've seen? Do you think that we would see the hyper-arming of the Middle East? Probably not.
We always have to make the next best thing better than whatever it was that we just sold around the world. And in that way, we're at war with ourselves. We're creating the threats which can then later be used against us, which we then have to surmount with the next level of technology.
But it's very difficult to recover from the human side. We have, thousands of people, those who lost their lives, and those who have the scars of the war. And the threat remains, even though the war has ended, because of the circulation of illicit small arms and light weapons in the area. For every child that is killed, you are destroying the future of that country. So it goes on and on. The consequences of small arms and light weapons, illicit weapons, is intolerable. We cannot allow this to go on. It must be stopped.
Only one other outfit was as busy as mine. Human nature being what it is, my operation tended to be more successful. Sometimes we even did business together. After flying guns into some war-torn country, the UN would rent my plane to fly their peacekeepers out. I promise, you can't make this shit up. Of course, every now and then I could see the value in making love, not war.
But I wasn't the only local kid making good.
Another Brooklynite seemed to be following me around.
A big thank you to former Miss America all the way from the US of A, Ava Fontaine.
We married in a synagogue to make my father happy. In the eyes of my Catholic mother, it was worse than living in sin.
It's traditional. It's all right. It's traditional.
It's traditional.
One more time, Vitali.
I'm sorry, I should have said something.
Finally, it will be religious freedom.
Let's hope so. I think I'll go back for a visit. Do you stay in touch with Uncle Dmitri?
Dmitri Volkov? Now and then.
How is
he? The luckiest man alive. You know, he was one of the first men at Chernobyl. He was roaring drunk when he got to the reactors. He was the only one who survived. Later, they found that alcohol in your blood resists radiation.
Is he still a general in the army?
Major general. Major. He got promoted. Two of his rivals were also at Chernobyl that day. I told you, he's the luckiest man alive.
He may be luckier than you think.
I'm not a fool, Yuri. I don't think you're going to Odessa to sell Pepsi Cola. Is this how you want to be remembered?
I don't want to be remembered at all. If I'm being remembered, it means I'm dead.
Merry fucking Christmas!
During the Cold War, the Red Army stationed nearly 1 million troops in Ukraine because of its strategic military importance. The day after the wall came down, the paychecks stopped coming. There's nothing better for an arms dealer than the combination of disgruntled soldiers and warehouses full of weapons.
Добро пожаловать.
I was hoping Major General Dmitri Volkov would open a lot of armory doors in a lot of military bases. For a start, he was family. He was a highly decorated hero of the Red Army, and he was almost permanently shit-faced.
Uncle Dmitri, come here and hug the luckiest man alive. What? Did you think I would be glowing? Don't worry, you can't catch it. Is this your silver spirit?
That's the new one.
May I look under the hood?
I think you'll be more impressed with what's under the trunk. Why?
Why?
I don't know. Why?
Why what?
Why? Why?
I don't know. I
Why?
don't know. I don't know.
Why?
What?
Why are you so fucked up all the time?
Because I am. We're going.
Her name's Candy.
to Manet, Monet, and Ava Fontaine.
Thank you. Yuri. Oh, they're beautiful. The transport business is really something, huh? No one would believe it.
No, I'm surprised more people don't do it.
But what am I gonna wear them with? I never want to say I heard it from you. I feel like all I've done my whole life is be pretty. I mean, all I've done is be born. I'm a failed actress, a failed artist, a failed businesswoman. Not much good as a mother. Come to think of it, I'm not even that pretty anymore. I have failed at everything, Yuri. But I won't fail as a human being.
Ava, you can't leave me. Baby, I'll stop. I'll stop. I've been thinking about it for a while. A lot lately. There's got to be something else I can do, right? I'll stop.
You will. Promise.
Yes. I promise. Okay, Tristan. We'll go out. Hey. You're wrong about not being pretty anymore.
In the old times, when it was still of some use to wish for the things that one wanted. Was that about the oil or the timber?
Both. Everything.
Why didn't you invite him in?
He couldn't stay. He was going shopping.
Next time.
Here from all over.
We're ready. Tape's rolling.
Oh, that is so cool. Okay. Let's just start in general. Could you please tell me what attracted you to the role or to the project in general as a producer and the actor?
Well, being the producer and the actor, I just thought it was original. I just thought it was fresh. And I had not seen a movie before about a gun runner. It just was unique material to me. And so on both fronts, I felt like I would learn something. I felt that I was doing something that would challenge me, and I wouldn't be repeating myself.
Yeah, maybe you can tell me in your own words what's the story about.
Well, the story is really kind of a slice of life of this character's life, Yuri Orlov, and how he rises to power as a gun runner from being a poor Ukrainian immigrant in just outside of Brooklyn to becoming the leading arms dealer of the world, who schmoozes with politicians and generals and the likes of that sort. And what's interesting about it is there's a lot of narration in the movie. And as the narrator, my character is very honest, and he's talking directly to you without lying about all the bad qualities of his character and maybe some of the good qualities, but he never lies to you. But in the movie, he's lying to everybody. He's lying to his wife, he's lying to his brother, he's lying to the people he sells guns to. I wanted him to be, without taking too much of your own interpretation away, I wanted him to be very charming. I wanted him to be a charming, appealing devil, if you will, so that he could be so successful. I don't think if he had shown his horns, and there are horns because it's really about the money for him, I think, he wouldn't have been as successful as he was. He's got to be a good salesman, and a good salesman knows how to look good and smile and make people feel comfortable with who they are.
So regarding those relations you were talking about in the movie, maybe you can tell me something about the relation from Yuri and his brother compared to Yuri and his wife or his parents.
Well, the Yuri Vitaly relationship in many ways is the central heart of the movie. It's the core relationship, the truest love story, because even though Yuri lies, he does lie a little bit less to his brother. And my character loves Vitaly and wants him to be okay, and is almost like a father figure to him because he doesn't want him to be high and on drugs. Tries to get him sober, and of course at the end what happens, and that's sort of the straw that breaks the camel's back for him. His relationship with his wife is a good one because he does provide and he takes care of her, and they live in, you know, kind of a very vain, extraordinary lifestyle. But and he tries to be good to his son, but he's always away on business, so it's not quite as close as his relationship with his brother, who he takes with him on business.
The entire movie is about bad conscience. I mean, at the end, like once your brother dies, you know, you're confronted with your own conscience. I would be interested in, if you were Yuri in real life, how would the story have ended? I mean, what would you have done in that particular situation when your brother would die or died?
What would I do? I wouldn't put my brother in that situation. I mean, that wouldn't be rule number one. I wouldn't risk my brother's life.
Okay. Well, let's see that morally conflicted person again with that bad conscience. It's an action movie, but there's always that deeper sense behind it. Compared to other movies that I saw, I mean, there's always a deeper sense behind it. It's always about reflecting personality, going inside, seeing that I'm just not the superficial person. There is something more behind my actions. So is that what challenged you about that movie, that bad conscience that actually comes out at the end, and what Yuri's going to do about it?
I like the bleakness of the ending. I like the cynicism of the ending. I thought it was very honest, very truthful. I don't like, well, that's not true. Sometimes I like formula endings, you know. I want to entertain you. I want you to go to the movies and have a good time, but I don't want to get in the habit of that. A lot of movies become calcified and typical because they follow formula structure, which is a result of the studio system wanting to make money. More power to them, that's great. But I also think it's important to have movies that are made that don't follow the formula, and they do leave you with questions at the end or feeling odd at the end, because that keeps the creative juices flowing. It keeps everything moving. It's not, I don't think, good to lapse into one type of story. Always a happy ending, always good wins. You know, that ain't life, you know, so.
And it would be boring, maybe. I don't know.
Maybe it will all be mush after a point.
For the shoot, you went to not only Manhattan, but South Africa and Czech Republic. What was the most exciting experience that you still remember from that time?
Well, I had wonderful experiences in South Africa. I went on a great white shark safari, and I got to meet the great white sharks face-to-face underwater. I went on other safaris and saw the wild dogs at Singida. and the elephants and rhinoceros. It was a beautiful time. It was a great time to. Alice and I had we were together on those trips, and it was, just very romantic.
And have you ever been to the Czech Republic before?
That was my first time, and well, what can I say? The architecture was extraordinary. It was really quite enchanted. I can see where Walt Disney got a lot of his ideas for the Enchanted Kingdom with the structure of the castles and whatnot. It looks like the real thing when you're there.
So it was not the Ukraine, but still, could you imagine the whole plot better when you were there at those landscapes, at those countries? Like the whole movie was about what was going on with the arms dealers. So could you imagine that a little better over there?
I mean, it was right in front of my face, so in a sense, I didn't have to imagine it. It was there. I mean, it was all the tanks and the helicopters. I mean, the movie didn't cost that much to make, and when you see that level of hardware, it looked like a really big movie. Just the rows upon rows of artillery.
We're done. I'm
okay,
so sorry.
Thanks.
But you're doing great.
Okay. Nice to
Thank
speak
you
with
so.
We're ready, tapes rolling.
Oh, that is so cool. Okay. Let's just start in general. Could you please tell me what attracted you to the role or to the project in general as a producer and the actor?
Well, being the producer and the actor, I just thought it was original. I just thought it was fresh. And I had not seen a movie before about a gun runner. It just was unique material to me. And so on both fronts, I felt like I would learn something. I felt that I was doing something that would challenge me, and I wouldn't be repeating myself.
Yeah, maybe you can tell me in your own words what's the story about.
Well, the story is really kind of a slice of life of this character's life, Yuri Orlov, and how he rises to power as a gun runner from being a poor Ukrainian immigrant in just outside of Brooklyn to becoming the leading arms dealer of the world, who schmoozes with politicians and generals and the likes of that sort. And what's interesting about it is there's a lot of narration in the movie. And as the narrator, my character is very honest, and he's talking directly to you without lying about all the bad qualities of his character and maybe some of the good qualities, but he never lies to you. But in the movie, he's lying to everybody. He's lying to his wife, he's lying to his brother, he's lying to the people he sells guns to. I wanted him to be, without taking too much of your own interpretation away, I wanted him to be very charming. I wanted him to be a charming, appealing devil, if you will, so that he could be so successful. I don't think if he had shown his horns, and there are horns because it's really about the money for him, I think, he wouldn't have been as successful as he was. He's got to be a good salesman, and a good salesman knows how to look good and smile and make people feel comfortable with who they are.
So regarding those relations you were talking about in the movie, maybe you can tell me something about the relation from Yuri and his brother compared to Yuri and his wife or his parents.
Well, the Yuri Vitaly relationship in many ways is the central heart of the movie. It's the core relationship, the truest love story, because even though Yuri lies, he does lie a little bit less to his brother. And my character loves Vitaly and wants him to be okay, and is almost like a father figure to him, because he doesn't want him to be high and on drugs. Tries to get him sober, and of course at the end what happens, and that's sort of the straw that breaks the camel's back for him. His relationship with his wife is is a good one because he does provide and he takes care of her, and they live in, you know, kind of a very vain, extraordinary lifestyle. But and he tries to be good to his son, but he's always away on business, so it's not quite as close as his relationship with his brother, who he takes with him on business.
The entire movie is about bad conscience. I mean, at the end, like once your brother dies, you know, you're confronted with your own conscience. I would be interested in, if you were Yuri in real life, how would the story have ended? I mean, what would you have done in that particular situation when your brother would die or died?
What would I do? I wouldn't put my brother in that situation. I mean, that wouldn't be rule number one. I wouldn't risk my brother's life.
Okay. Well, let's see that morally conflicted person again with that bad conscience. It's an action movie, but there's always that deeper sense behind it. Compared to other movies that I saw, I mean, there's always a deeper sense behind it. It's always about reflecting personality, going inside, seeing that I'm just not the superficial person. There is something more behind my actions. So is that what challenged you about that movie, that bad conscience that actually comes out at the end, and what Yuri's going to do about it?
I like the bleakness of the ending. I like the cynicism of the ending. I thought it was very honest, very truthful. I don't like, well, that's not true. Sometimes I like formula endings, you know. I want to entertain you. I want you to go to the movies and have a good time, but I don't want to get in the habit of that. A lot of movies become calcified and typical because they follow formula structure, which is a result of the studio system wanting to make money. More power to them, that's great. But I also think it's important to have movies that are made that don't follow the formula, and they do leave you with questions at the end or feeling odd at the end, because that keeps the creative juices flowing. It keeps everything moving. It's not, I don't think, good to lapse into one type of story. Always a happy ending, always good wins. You know, that ain't life, you know. So.
And it would be boring, maybe. I don't know.
Maybe it will all be mush after a point.
For the shoot, you went to not only Manhattan but South Africa and Czech Republic. What was the most exciting experience that you still remember from that time?
Well, I had wonderful experiences in South Africa. I went on a great white shark safari, and I got to meet the great white sharks face to face underwater. I went on other safaris and saw the wild dogs at Singida, and the elephants and rhinoceros. It was a beautiful time. It was a great time Alice and I we were together on those trips, and it was, you know, just very romantic.
And have you ever been to the Czech Republic before?
That was my first time, and well, what can I say? The architecture was extraordinary. It was really quite enchanted. I can see where Walt Disney got a lot of his ideas for the Enchanted Kingdom with the structure of the castles and whatnot. It looks like the real thing when you're there.
So it was not the Ukraine, but still, could you imagine the whole plot better when you were there at those landscapes, at those countries? Like the whole movie was about what was going on with the arms dealers. So could you imagine that a little better over there?
I mean, it was right in front of my face, so in a sense I didn't have to imagine it. It was there. I mean, it was all the tanks and the helicopters. I mean, the movie didn't cost that much to make, and when you see